welcome to the second Journal Club. We're really excited to have you all. And I think Bob's going to give a short overview and then get into more of the critique, which I think is really what is of most interest to everybody.
So general goals for Journal Club, I think Emily alluded to it, but more or less, we want to critique studies and be able to, background, understand the history, what forms medical and health policy decisions, better understand the philosophy and malpractice of research methods. But I think it really comes down to here, just how to read a paper. When a paper comes out and says X is associated with Y, suggests that, in the case that we're looking at, that high protein intake is associated with increased mortality or decreased mortality actually in the same paper. So this is really about reading a paper and understanding it, because sometimes I think that the investigators, what their conclusions are and their interpretations are not exactly what I think we should draw from them. I heard about this study. People said, looks like a high protein intake causes cancer and shortens lifespan. I looked at this study and I honestly, I thought, like, what is this word salad for it's an awfully convoluted way to say that protein's good, but it's not in the older population. So that's just an aside on that one. So this is like the upshot of the paper, that their highlights say high protein intake is linked to increased cancer, diabetes, and overall mortality. High IGF-1 levels increase the relationship between mortality and high protein. So maybe IGF-1 had something to do with this, with the protein and the mortality. I think the hypothesis was that they thought that they were going to find low protein intake improves lifespan and health span relative to high protein intake consumption. And so, and here they're looking at mortality. So health span is really how long do you live healthfully. But they did look at all-cause mortality, and then they also looked at cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes as well. And they did find a positive association between moderate and high protein and diabetes-related mortality. So the translation, there's no link between protein consumption and mortality besides diabetes-related mortality. The way that they present this, I think, is backwards. I think that they saw what you're going to see on the next slide, and then they set it up this way and said, maybe it was this alternative explanation. Let's test this hypothesis. But what they're really doing is they're looking at the data, and then they're generating a hypothesis from that data, which is fine in some ways, not in the way that they're presenting it here. And they found significant interactions for both all-cause mortality and cancer mortality. And so more or less, this is in the title of the paper, that low protein in your mid-50s is good, low protein in your 60s and beyond, not so good. If you look at the evidence-based pyramid, you'll see systematic reviews and meta-analyses at the top, and I always think, what are you reviewing? What are you analyzing? And oftentimes those are done because the individual studies you have to collect all the studies to show something or not. But in this case, those analyses don't show a significant relationship, although there are some studies in isolation that hint at an effect or an association. So for the critique, I'm going to highlight a few, and we'll run through these. When you report that information, that's what you ate yesterday, is that I'm going to take that information and I'm going to assume that you were accurate in that reporting. I'm also going to assume that what you ate yesterday is what you ate today, or what you're going to eat today, and tomorrow, and the next day, and every day until you die when I do one of these analyses. And in this case, there were 6,380 participants. I'm adding you to all those participants, and I'm assuming the same for them. So they have 1 day of that information in all of their participants once. I don't think that the study was well validated by this group. Well, if you really dig into what is your exposure, how are you measuring that exposure, and how accurate is it? I would argue they have no idea what the exposure, they have no idea how much protein these people were eating. Or I would say, let's figure out better ways in which we can collect this information going forward, and better track or monitor it, because this is not very reliable. And I also think it's questionable as well to say, well, then how do you know that your exposure was your exposure? and then you're going to make public health recommendations based on that. Seems like a bit much. So the question is, how many comparisons have they actually made? Probably a lot more than the ones that you just see published. And so given their data set, we should expect an extremely high level of noise. So baseline characteristics omitted. I don't know if this was omission or commission, but what happened was, or I don't know if this is a story, but they had that original sample and then they stratified that sample set, right? They never showed the characteristics of those two samples. So at least I can't see it. They can if they want to. I can't see what those participants look like at baseline. That was baseline, but I'm wondering if they call it sample because they didn't show baseline characteristics in their study. Healthy user bias. Maybe people are already familiar with this, so I'll go very quickly. People who are health conscious are different from people who are not in many different ways. So if it's something like meat intake or smoking or exercise or eating fruits and vegetables, that if somebody's doing one of those things, they may be more likely to do all of those things. And if some of those things are related to the outcome, it's very difficult to isolate one of those things and say that's the thing that's playing the role exclusively. And then I said here, if reporting actual observations from a study is likely to be misinterpreted, the study is likely garbage, is that I have emailed on more than one occasion investigators asking them I said, you're not providing your outcomes. You don't have any of your outcomes in here. All I can see is a relative difference between your groups, but you didn't report the number of events in your groups. I should be able to look at that data and look at the entire cohort, and I should say, this should comport with what cancer deaths look like for people of this age in the general population. It should almost be a match. I always find it a little suspicious that if an investigator says, like, we can't report our outcomes because that would lead to more confusion. If reporting your outcomes leads to more confusion, it confuses me why that study would be useful. I'm saying, again, taking it at face value, if protein matters and risk of cancer death matters to you, and they're saying age, there's an interaction of age with protein, I would say there's also an interaction with whatever age means, right? It could be, a lot of stuff could carried with that, is that if you think about age for a minute, think about cancer risk in your age. You'd care a lot more about cancer death when it kills a much greater proportion of the population. And so if you look at it that way, the fact that they found a higher protein intake, whether you trust that or not, associated with lower all-cause mortality and lower cancer mortality, in a way, you know that made a larger impact in terms of, because again, remember, they're only looking at relative risks. They're not looking at absolute numbers. And then these are my conclusions. So people have called it torturing the data until it confesses. Usually it confesses to what you want it to. And here, the data, right? What data are you torturing? Like, the data itself is torturing what they're saying is protein intake. It's not. It's a lot of things. If it is protein intake, it's also a lot of things. And I question whether it even is an accurate representation, or if it matters. And the interpretation, they use causal language pretty much throughout the paper. They don't say they imply causation by making causal statements and then pull all the examples. In that case, like, none of that is dishonest. But I just don't understand if he understands how bad this data, like how bad this interpretation is.
What can I do? What can we do as a group? What are we trying to do here to help further good quality research while not decimating careers?
Well, I mean, I'll just jump in quickly and then I'll turn it over to Bob. But I think part of the goal here is to expose the bad work, which, if you put it in the realm of journalism, right, which is where my experience comes from, there was always a fear if you got something wrong, even if it was an accident, that you'd be exposed. And so in newspapers, right, it used to be that they would post a correction in the next day's paper. And it happened to everybody. You spelled somebody's name wrong or some sort of incidental thing or some big thing. And it was humiliating. So I think people were really, back in the day, thoughtful about being really careful about fact checking, both because you wanted to get your story right, but also you didn't want to be exposed for it. And I think part of what Journal Club hopefully will do by creating a resource library of these studies, it's highly unlikely we're going to do this for studies that we're like, wow, this is really great. Maybe if we find one, we will. But my hope is that people come to find that we are a trusted source, a credible source, so that when you're going to either take an intervention or a drug yourself or prescribe it to a patient or write about it, you use us as a sort of litmus test for what went wrong and what could have been done better. So I would hope that making this available to you all, and then also just, I know from my experience that the more I do these kinds of things, the more I can quickly read other stuff and get more out of it, or assess up like, oh, like in the last one, we talked a lot about intention to treat and per protocol analysis, which is something I didn't really know a lot about. I think the change only comes about when, enough people are wise to this, or when you all in the medical sphere can start really looking at clinical significance and recognizing where this research is working and where it's not, and then driving change directly in your patient population.